So we're here today to talk about the collection and preservation of digital evidence. And as law enforcement officers and responders to crime scenes, I'm going to tell you some of the five key things you should know about collecting and preserving digital evidence. First, digital evidence can be found in all types of crimes. When we think about computer crime, we sometimes get focused on the hacking cases or the case where somebody breaks into a computer and is involved in the crime. But digital evidence itself can be found in all types of crimes, everywhere from homicide cases to the traditional computer crime type of cases. Second, every crime scene is a digital evidence crime scene. We used to respond to the crime scene over here on the left. And you can see that this photograph here has the realistic blood that looks like jelly, basically. Somebody took some strawberry jelly and poured it out there. But we used to respond to those type of crime scenes. We have a homicide, there's a typewriter, there's a phone book or some kind of other documentation there. But now the crime scenes we respond to are like we have pictured over here on the right. We have laptops, we have PDAs, cell phones, thumb drives, all types of media that can store digital evidence and can store evidence of a crime. The third thing you need to remember is that digital evidence can be fragile. We're talking about ones and zeros on different types of media that can be easily altered and easily destroyed. We go to the crime scene, and what do we want to do? We want to find out, we serve that search warrant, we want to find out, did we find the evidence? So we make the mistake of turning on the computer and getting the most computer savvy officer we have and looking at that computer to see if we find evidence that we're looking for, whether it be child pornography, whatever type of case we're involved in. What we forget is that when we turn on that computer, we alter that evidence. So it makes it, can be an issue when we go to court and we have to explain why dates and times match or show up on images after the date the search warrant was served. It can be kind of embarrassing. We have to remember that we can turn on a computer and alter, just turning on, by the act of itself of turning on the computer can alter that evidence. And it's fragile, can be easily destroyed. Next, it can be easily altered. Digital evidence can be easily altered, whether it's inadvertently or by a suspect in our case trying to hide the evidence. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that when we are seizing this evidence, we want to make sure that we don't alter it ourselves. Now, I just talked about how fragile it is and how easily altered it is. That's true, but we also have to remember that we can never assume that it's destroyed. We have been able to forensically recover evidence from broken CDs, DVDs, cut up floppy disks. I was involved in a case with a video recorder where they had a video surveillance system set up at their place of business, and there was a fire there. The video recorder itself had some smoke damage, some actual fire damage, and we were able to remove that hard drive from that box and recover video that was on that surveillance camera. And what did it show? It actually showed the owner of the building setting fire to his own building. So he wasn't aware that sometimes digital evidence isn't destroyed. He thought the fire would take care of that. Unfortunately, it kind of ruined his plan to have an insurance claim. So it's fragile, has to be handled properly, but don't ever assume it's destroyed. If you find some evidence at a search warrant or crime scene, floppy disk or something that looks damaged, go ahead and still seize that evidence, because it's possible that we can recover information from it. Criminal uses of digital evidence. We think the computer can be the target of the crime, it can be the instrument of the crime, and it sometimes can be the repository of the evidence. What we mean by that is that it can contain the evidence that we're looking for in the crime. So it can be involved in one of these factors or all three of them. For example, in a hacking case, the instrument of the crime would be the computer itself, and the target would be the computer. So traditionally, we think of the target of the crime being the computer itself. And in most of those type of hacking cases, that's the case. In Oklahoma, we had a case of the computer system at the Department of Health that contained the health records, the birth certificates and death certificates, which are now all scanned in and stored in digital format. So if you needed to get a birth certificate, you go down, they pull it up on the computer and print you off your official birth certificate. Well, that computer that contained those had crashed. So they called the computer response team to come out and look at it, and we found that the computer itself had been broken into through a dial-in access. They dialed in. It looks like they didn't take any of the files there. It looks like their intent was just to crash the computer, but you can think of the ramifications that would have been if they would have known what they had there and were able to get all those birth certificates or death certificates from Oklahoma from years and years past. Can you easily use those to do what? Change identity and do those kind of things. So in that case, we're talking about the computer as the target of the crime. Computers as the instrument of the crime, whether it's used to break into a computer, or in this case, Amy Boyer, this case happened in the Northeast. Amy went to high school with Mr. Yowens here, and he really didn't know she existed, or she didn't know he existed. He was infatuated with her, always wanted to be her boyfriend. They graduated from high school. Amy went on to go to work. Mr. Yowens used the computer and free services and pay services to find out all the information he could about Amy, where she lived, what her social security number was, where she worked, all that information. He also used the computer and put a website up proclaiming his love for Amy and for talking about how if he couldn't have Amy, nobody else could. Actually talked about what he would do, how he would kill Amy if it came down to that. That website was up for quite a while. Unfortunately, he did go kill Amy after she got off work one day. She never knew he existed, but he used the computer to stalk her, to find out information about her, and to actually post on the internet his intentions of killing her. Who knows how many people saw that, ignored it, didn't do anything, thought it was a joke, but that information and that evidence became evidence after that homicide. So it had to be collected and preserved in a way. But here's a case of the computer being used as the instrument of the crime. Computers as the repository of evidence, meaning that computer contains what we're looking for to make our case. That could be as little as searches on the computer for a silencer or for ways to poison somebody. We've had homicide cases where that was the case, where we were able to go back, look in the computer, and we could see previous searches through Google or Yahoo to looking for, they type in the search command silencer. So that computer contained the evidence of the crime. Could be images in child pornography cases, or it could be like these brain scientists here who had a nice operation growing marijuana. So they were very proud of it. They took their pictures of the plants, and then, of course, took the pictures of themselves smoking marijuana, which always is good for our case, right? If we can find that on the computer. So whether, and I talk in broad terms computer, but I'm talking about digital evidence. It could be thumb drives, it could be anything that contains this kind of information. Some other examples of repository of evidence: chat logs. In child sexual exploitation cases, where somebody's traveling or chatting with a child online and traveling sometimes interstate or long distances to have sex with a child, they keep these. A lot of times they will keep their chat conversations. They will log their chat when they're talking to the child or a teenager online, so that they can go back and relive those chats. So they keep that information. So it's possible we can find some of that. Also, computers nowadays are so powerful. They can the printers that we can buy now at Best Buy are of such quality that a lot of times we'll find people making false IDs, false driver's license, using those. A lot of times they're college students using those to make sure they can get their 21-year-old license to go to the bar. But those images and those things are on the computer. So the computer or the thumb drive, sometimes it could be even the Xbox that has a hard drive in it, can store that information. So we always have to be aware of, when we're working a case, how is digital evidence involved? We always think about fingerprints, we think about DNA, we think about those kind of traditional things, but digital evidence is very prevalent now in all our cases. Prime example, 30 years, the BTK killer. We've all heard about this case. BTK killed 10 people over about a 30-year period in Wichita, Kansas, in Sedgwick County. He would send letters to law enforcement. He would send letters to the press giving clues. Played a little bit of a cat and mouse game with law enforcement for quite a while. Do we know what caught the BTK, Dennis Radar? It was digital evidence, floppy disk. Dennis Radar thought that he had established a rapport with law enforcement and thought he could, he sent a message to law enforcement, and I'll show you a short video clip here, and asked them, if I send you my next clues on a floppy disk, can you trace that? And of course, what did we say back? No, we can't do that. So he did send a video, a floppy disk, and I'll show you a short video of this, of what he thought was going on.
You're going to get caught. No. This guy is not going to get caught. He didn't absolutely not. No, I didn't want to get caught. Okay. I wanted to put everything on floppies. They would go to the floppy to the CD. The CD would either go to safe deposit or a very hiding hole, and I could always bring it back out.
Many have speculated that Radar's repeated messages were indeed a cry to be captured. But James Fox says it's just the opposite.
He felt invincible, unstoppable. And that's why the serial killers do communicate with the police. Not because they want to invite capture. Because they feel that the police are no match for their skill, their cunning, their stardom, their brilliance. So what often happens among serial killers is they get so cocky and they make a mistake.
And that's just what happened. It was Rader himself who helped bring police to his door. It started in January 2005 when Rader placed a letter in a pickup truck at this Home Depot, which eventually made its way to police. In it, Rader, identifying himself only as BTK, asked the police whether they could catch him if he used a computer disk to communicate. He asked the police to respond in a classified ad, and he asked them to be honest.
I mean, actually, I thought, yeah, I could catch it. He said no. They said, did you really think they were going to tell you the truth? No, I thought they would. I thought they wanted me to finish the story. I really thought I had a rapport with them. I really did.
I mean, doesn't that seem kind of dumb? To believe that the police would tell you the truth about something like that?
I mean, he's been playing games with us for 30 years, and you think we're going to shoot straight with you? I don't think so.
So naturally, the police lied and told the killer they couldn't take the disc to him and waited to see if he would fall for it, which he did. Rader's last communication was a computer disk filled with more taunts and puzzles. He sent it to a local television station. The police were able to trace it to a Dennis and a computer at Rader's church. By Googling the church name and Dennis, police quickly zeroed in on Dennis Rader. What nailed him ultimately was the last floppy disk he
Yeah,
said.
well, what nailed him was his hubris. He went too far.
Police also used a surveillance tape from that Home Depot to figure out that the person who dropped off the BTK letter was driving a car registered to Dennis Rader's son. But to make certain they had their man, they needed a DNA match. So authorities got a warrant for a tissue sample from Rader's daughter on file at a Kansas medical clinic. Tests showed it was a close match to the evidence drawn from the crime scenes.
So, digital evidence led to the conclusion of a 30-year-old homicide case. Dennis Rader had, when they actually ended up searching his home and other places, they seized 17 computers, 27 floppy disks from 5 different crime scenes. So a lot of digital evidence. Dennis Rader had begun to archive his souvenirs from his crimes. He would take some souvenirs from crimes, he was scanning them and taking photographs of them and then burning them onto CD and then destroying the originals. So he was making an archive for posterity's sake. So we can see how digital evidence is important in our cases, but how do we identify it? And I'm going to talk about 4 different types of digital evidence: commonplace, obscure, protected, and concealed. Commonplace digital evidence. We didn't think about it in the past, but now commonplace is PDAs, cell phones, thumb drives, the SIM cards on the digital cameras. Commonplace places where we think of possibility of storing digital evidence. And we have found evidence in all of these places. Not just the computer hard drive, but other avenues. Recovered videos, short video of a sexual assault and rape, where one guy used his cell phone to record his accomplice committing the rape. Able to recover that information. But we got to think about where digital evidence might be stored. Obscure type of digital evidence. Printers, GPS devices, and the digital cameras now can contain evidence of a crime. We have to think about those when we're serving our search warrant and the possibility that we may need to collect those things. Printers can now store send documents to the printer can store a lot of those documents in memory, and we can recover those. Protected devices. Those kind of devices used in biometrics with the fingerprint scans and the retina scans. Those are becoming more and more prevalent. You find laptops now that have the fingerprint scanner that when you log into your laptop, you have to use the fingerprint scanner. So it's becoming more readily available. And then the concealed digital evidence. We're serving a search warrant that we know may contain digital evidence. We have to think about the small, different types of digital evidence that can be easily concealed. A suspect can take a little SIM card, put it inside a pack of cigarettes or a pack of gum and put it in their pocket. So we have to start thinking about those kind of things when we're serving our search warrant. And here's some prime examples. The Lego blocks that have a SIM card in them. The different variations of the thumb and flash drives. The poker chip that can hold 2 gigabytes of data. The Xbox, the PS2 and 3 have hard drives in them. They can contain digital evidence, and we've actually recovered child pornography off the hard drives in those boxes where suspects were concealing the evidence of the crime on those devices. We have to identify the physical evidence, and then we have to have the legal considerations when we're serving our search warrant. We need to have a search warrant, we need to have consent, or we need to find some of the evidence in plain view. Digital evidence in plain view might be a little bit of a stretch. I mean, because we can't really see ones and zeros all the time, but it's important that we collect, just like we collect all forensic evidence and all evidence, that we collect it in a legal manner so that we can use it in court. One thing about digital evidence, though, is when we do a search warrant and we're specifically targeting digital evidence, for example, a computer, we want to make sure our search warrant details that we want to look at what's on the computer, that we're looking for the evidence on the computer or stored on the floppy disk or stored on the thumb drives. I've seen a lot of search warrants written where they were written well enough so we could seize the computer itself, but they had to go get another warrant because they weren't written well enough so that we could look at what's on the computer. It doesn't do us much good to have the computer if we can't see what's inside. So get with somebody that has written a warrant for digital evidence in the past to help you get that language. There's a lot of examples of that language available from different computer crime units. The FBI Regional Computer Forensics Laboratories have that language available so that you're able to seize the evidence and be able to see what's on the devices. The evidence crime scene kit for digital evidence recovery. A little bit different than the crime scene kits you'll see for some other types of recovery. Again, gloves, the ability, the number of screwdrivers and different devices that you're going to need to open computers, remove hard drives. Again, we're talking about electronic data, so we need a kit that we can collect that type of information. Two things to consider when we're serving a search warrant. All search warrants across the board, computer, digital search warrants are no different. First, officer safety. Just because it's a computer case does not mean that it's going to be some 14-year-old geek behind the computer. It could be somebody that plans to do harm to law enforcement. So no matter what the case is, search warrant, officer safety. And then protect the evidence. We might not think about biological hazards for blood evidence, biological fluid evidence. We have some biological hazards for computer evidence, as you can see in these photographs. That snake is dead, but it was actually in the computer. When we execute the search warrant and looking for digital evidence, we need to isolate the computer, which means that we have to make sure that it is not altering evidence or changing evidence at the time. So we need to make sure that it's disconnected from any network. We need to make sure that it's disconnected from the internet. So we need to isolate the computer so that it can't be altered. Because with computers and computer evidence, we know that we can connect to computers remotely, right? We do that all the time through the internet. So it is possible that even though your suspect may not be there at the scene while you're serving the search warrant, but they could be connecting back to the computer and possibly destroying evidence. So we need to make sure that we can isolate the computer. Just like all cases where we're serving a search warrant, we need to document the scene, which means taking notes, taking photographs, and then ultimately doing some sketches of that scene. It's not any different in a digital evidence scene than any other scene. Documentation is the key. Sketching the crime scene. Traditionally, we know we make sketches of the crime scene where we place pieces of evidence in the crime scene. With the digital evidence, we have to take it a little bit further. We have to document the condition of the computer. How was it connected? Was there a network there? How were the computers connected? Because it may be that we have to go back and reconstruct that for the court. So we need to be able to document it and sketch it in a way so that we could actually reconnect all those components of that system when if we needed to in court. Identify the components with the numbers and tags and photograph. Desktops, laptops, printers, hard drives. Again, we want to photograph, but photograph it in a way that we can identify with the number tenths in there so we can identify the pieces of evidence. And document everything in the scene with photographs. And in this case, you can see that we've actually also included the books that are on the shelves, the manuals for the software, because taking photographs of that can maybe give the forensic examiner later, the digital forensic examiner, some kind of idea of the sophistication of the user. You know, did they have some rather sophisticated books on their shelves? Were they using some sophisticated types of programs that maybe the typical computer user won't use? That information can be important to the forensic examiner when they're looking at that evidence. Some other things about documenting the scene. Shut down the system if necessary. It's always the old debate on whether we should shut down the system by pulling the plug, going to the back of the computer and pulling it out the back of the computer. Why do we pull it out the back of the computer and not out of the wall? What if they have uninterrupted power supply? What if they have, when power goes out, some computer users have a battery backup system that will run for 15 minutes or so until they can shut down their computer in a normal manner. So in order to make sure that we pull the power to that, and if we need to pull it out right out of the back of the computer and not out of the power outlet. But the debate is, should we shut it down by pulling the power or should we turn it off normally? And it's really hard to give a good answer to that. It depends on the operating system, it depends on exactly what's going on. So if at all possible, take somebody to your search warrant, if you know it's going to involve computer evidence, that has some background in digital evidence, computer forensics, that can evaluate the scene at the time and decide whether they want to shut down the system normally or just to cut the power to the system. Packaging and transporting digital evidence. Just like all types of other forensic evidence, there's a good way and a bad way to package digital evidence. We want to make sure that, again, we're not altering or destroying any evidence, and that we can preserve it in a manner so that it can be forensically evaluated. So we want to control the evidence. We might want to put a piece of tape over the floppy or the CD so that we can make sure that nobody has access. We can verify that nobody accessed the machine, but we probably don't want to go overboard with the one here on the right that has a little bit too much tape, too much protection. We want to store and collect this in a manner that we can safely move it from one location to the other. And with computers, you can store them in bags. You can use packing boxes and packing materials to store them so that the components don't move around too much. But they need to be handled in a way not to alter the evidence. Consideration with laptops. We talked about removing the power from the regular tower computers or desktop computers. What do we have to consider with laptops? Battery. They have a battery, so we might unplug a laptop, but we also need to remove the battery. We want to make sure that that computer is not doing anything that we don't want it to do. So remember to remove the batteries in laptops. Other types of digital evidence. There are some things we want to do with cell phones in particular because of that a cell phone is always going out to check and see where it is. So after we've seized the cell phone and it starts receiving calls or text messages, it would be after the date that we seized it. So we want to, but sometimes removing the battery we can actually lose some data. So we want to store it away, and over here is an example of what they call a Faraday cage, which blocks the signal from the cell phone. That way we can leave it on, but it won't be looking for a tower. Not always possible to collect it that way. So it's best to get a cell phone, package it as a cell phone, make sure it's identified as a cell phone, and get it to the forensic examiner as soon as possible so that it can be handled and the data can be recovered as soon as possible. A lot of times, if a cell phone or a PDA loses its power, it also can lose some of the data that's there. Transporting, again, in a secure manner. Electronic components sometimes don't do good jostling around. For those of us that have the old radio systems in our trunk of their cars or patrol cars, they put out a electromagnetic signal. We don't really want to put computer evidence next to magnets. The possibility of it altering evidence is there. The best place really to transport a computer is in the floorboard in the back seat of a car, of the patrol car or another car. You also want to make sure that they don't shake around as little as possible. And just like all types of evidence, you want to document the date, the time, the location it was seized, and then identify that on the packaging. So, in review, 5 key facts you need to know about the digital evidence. It can be in all of the cases that you work. It doesn't matter if it's a regular, traditional computer crime or it's a homicide investigation. Digital evidence can be in all those cases. Most of the crime scenes that you go to are going to contain digital evidence. It can be fragile. Has to be handled in a manner that we don't alter it, because it can be easily altered. And we don't want to be the ones that alter that when we're making that collection. And never assume that it's destroyed. If you find some broken CDs, broken DVDs at a crime scene, don't assume that nothing can be recovered from them, because it is possible. Not always, but in some cases it's possible. The best thing you can have is this short guide. I think it's about 24 pages. It's put out by the FBI, that is, and the Regional Computer Forensics Laboratories, and the Computer Analysis Response Team, or CART, with the FBI. What every peace officer should know about seizing digital evidence. And it basically details everything that I've just told you today about seizing digital evidence. And it's an easy guide to have with you when you go serve your search warrant or you're working your case, and it'll get you to thinking about how you want to collect and preserve digital evidence. Thank you very much.